All right, welcome into the Butt and Breneman show. Actually, the Breneman and Butt show. Who am I kidding? It's
Let's
the Breneman
go.
Butt show from here on out because your alma mater won, mine didn't. So maybe we should just start there because actually, let's start here. Let's talk about the college football playoff rankings. Came
Yes.
out last night. It is Wednesday. I'll lay this out real quick, then we'll get into it. Big Ten heavily represented in the top five. Oregon, no change there. They're at number one. Ohio State, number two. Texas is number three. Your alma mater, Penn State, is coming in at number four. Indiana at number five. So a little bit of movement there. Now, of course, that's not the way the playoff bracket works. There's buys. So to lay that one out, Oregon would be the Big Ten team to get a bye. They'd be number one. Then as you look at it, Ohio State would be the first team without a bye. So Ohio State would be number five. Based on their rankings, they would play Boise State. Penn State would be number six. Based on the
Yeah.
rankings, they would be hosting a playoff game against Ole Miss. And then Indiana would be number seven, hosting a playoff game against Alabama. Oregon, again, the only team from the Big Ten projected to get a bye at this point. So a little bit of shakeup, a little bit of excitement. What are your thoughts? And if you
Yeah.
want to, Adam, any thoughts even beyond the Big Ten with the way the rankings just dropped?
Well, I mean, I don't think anyone would have predicted that the Big Ten would have four of the top five teams in the college football playoff rankings, in early November, and especially wouldn't think that Indiana would be in there. But that's where we sit, and it's a great time to be in the Big Ten, man.
Yeah.
There's a lot of good football at the top of this conference, and it's really going to be interesting to see how this plays out. And we talk all the time offline, Jake, about SEC bias and what's going on. And the question's going to become as the next couple of weeks play out, and as Indiana probably loses to Ohio State, but that's going to be a great game. But let's just assume that they do.
Yep.
Where Indiana plays into this thing compared to maybe an SEC team that has two or three losses. You got an SEC team that may lose the conference championship game, end up with three losses. Do they still get in the playoff? And if so, how does the Big Ten still get four teams in? That's going to be what is interesting to follow throughout the next couple of weeks. It's going to be so crucial, Jake, for Indiana to keep that game close against Ohio State, because we've seen it before. We've seen what the committee did with Florida State last year. We've seen Indiana, let's call it like it is. They're not going to have a signature win on their schedule unless they beat Ohio State. They're not going to have a great win. So they have to keep that game close to give the Big Ten a chance here of getting four teams in the playoff, which I know is what we all want.
Yeah, listen, and I think Indiana has done enough to deserve a spot as it stands right now. But I just want to give the other side just a voice here to say part of the reason we liked the 12-team playoff was because of what it incentivized. And we had an issue in college football where, teams, look at Michigan last year. We talked the whole season about saying how they didn't really play anyone. They weren't really tested until they played Penn State and Ohio State. And the whole benefit of the 12-team playoff is, hey, you can schedule more challenging matchups because you have more room for error. And yes, okay, say Indiana finishes 11-1 and their only loss is to Ohio State. And say Georgia, let's say Georgia loses this weekend, they'd have three losses: Tennessee, Ole Miss, Alabama. They also have some great wins in the conference. They dominated Texas. They dominated Clemson. So, like, what does I see? Basically, what I'm saying is I see where the committee would be coming from if they say, listen, I get it, Indiana only has one loss, but look at the wins Georgia has. Like, those are multiple wins that Indiana doesn't have, and this is where kind of the complexity of the logic for the committee is going to come into play.
Yeah, and I think the only way a three-loss SEC team gets in the playoff is with a conference championship loss. That's really the only path I see for that possibly happening. But there's going to be a lot of those conversations. Every year we have, we've been talking about the teams on the bubble at 5 and 6, but now it's just going to be the teams on the bubble at 13, 14, 15. What do those all look like? And, who's the group of five team that makes it? Is it Boise State? And how does that play into things? Where are they ranked? It's going to be fun to see how this whole thing plays out. And, it's really given more meaning, I feel like, to all these games late in the season. More teams are in the hunt than ever before. I just saw some data talking about, people talking about the playoff and the teams around the playoff. It's fun that we get to talk about SMU and what's SMU's path to making the playoff. It's fun that Indiana even if they lose a game, can make the college football playoff here and have a chance to control their own destiny. And I think that the one wild card, we kind of have Oregon and Ohio State at the top of the conference, is how good is Penn State? We're really not sure. And right now, if the playoff were tomorrow, Penn State would host Ole Miss in a first round playoff game. Great matchup. Happy Valley would be rocking for a chance then to play BYU in the quarterfinals. So it's going to be really fun to see how this whole thing plays out, and it's certainly shaping up pretty well right now for the Big Ten.
Yeah, so let's just to break it down real quick too. The auto bids were a big point of discussion. So you have really 5 auto bids, 4 conference champions, and really a group of 5, right? So you have there's 5 of your 12, 5 of 12 spots guaranteed. So then you're fighting for 7 spots, the next 7. And where this gets dicey is, let's take a team like BYU who's undefeated right now, and let's say they win out and keep winning. I don't know if I believe that that'll be the case, but let's just say it happens. They win out, and let's say Colorado, for example, who has 2 losses currently, also wins out, and they meet in the Big 12 championship. Without the conference title, BYU would be in, and that would probably be the only team represented in the Big 12. But say Colorado upsets BYU in the Big 12 championship. Now remember, we're only fighting for 7 spots. Colorado would get the bid. The committee would have to say, wow, BYU, we can't penalize them, which is what Ward Manuel and the committee has said, for losing in the conference title game. So now all of a sudden, one of those spots that wouldn't have been taken up by a Big 12 team is going to be taken up by a Big 12 team, because they'll be the same auto bid, but now the team that was expected to get the auto bid gets one of those 7. And that can happen in the ACC. That can happen in other places as well.
Yeah. Jake, I want to pick your brain on this, hear your thoughts, because I don't know if I'm a huge fan of the conference championship games, man. With the first round bye in the playoff and how important winning a conference championship is, the fact that you could have a 3-4 loss team in the Big 12 championship, probably 3 loss, and beat BYU, who's undefeated, and then get a first round bye and be the 4 seed in the 4 seed in the playoff, it kind of throws a whole wrench in everything and really has a chance to mess up how the playoff plays out. But I guess that's part of the fun of it, right?
Yeah. I like the conference championship. I like the game, but the way it works with the current structure of what you're saying, but I agree with you, where I don't like the way they fit together like a puzzle piece right now. I like the idea of a conference championship. I like the idea that we're going to get to potentially see a rematch of Oregon and Ohio State, or potentially get to see a Cinderella story, Indiana against Oregon. I like that idea, but I don't like the way it's structured with the auto bids. And the one thing is we know to embrace change by now. There is more change coming in the future. So I could see it now, 16 team, 18 team, 20 plus team playoffs. So that's where things can get interesting.
Jake, here's what I want to dive into. Watching the Penn State Washington game was so frustrating for me, because where was that offense against Ohio State?
You tell me.
Where was it?
You tell me.
I did a lot of thinking about this. I loved Penn State's use of offensive tempo in the Washington game. I love how they played fast. When they got a big play, they got right up to the line of scrimmage and snapped the football. They were good in the run game. Their playmakers got the ball. Tyler Warren was running the ball, ran for a touchdown. So I felt the offense just looked way more explosive and in command of that game. What I come back to with the Ohio State game is I really feel like Penn State thought too much about trying to control the ball in that game. They thought too much about, they got up to the 10-0 lead and thought way too much about, I don't want to use the word conservative, but just didn't put their foot on the gas the way they did against Washington. They didn't play with the confidence they played against Washington. And I get it. Ohio State's a great defense, but that offense we saw against Washington is how Penn State needs to play the rest of the season. They need that version of their offense in the college football playoff, not the version we saw against Ohio State. And still want to see a little bit more of a vertical passing game down the field. We're probably not going to get it because of the lack of an elite receiver at Penn State, but I was encouraged with the Washington performance. I thought Kotelnicki, after getting a lot of flack over the past week after the Ohio State game, called a really good game, had a nice game plan that complemented the run and the pass well, used tempo. But man, I was like, where was this 7 days ago?
I know. No, I'm with you. And the big question for Penn State is, listen, the past is the past. You lost to Ohio State. Can they learn? Can they use
Yeah,
that to their advantage? Okay, you lost, but hey, now we're talking about a potential matchup against Ole Miss. Well, you better learn and say, we're going to use the game plan that we had against Washington rather than Ohio State when it comes to the playoffs. And I just go back to, if you're inside the 4 yard line, Tyler Warren's got to have 2 touches.
no
I
doubt.
mean, he, and it's not just the fact that he can power through the line. He jumps and where was the
Yeah,
ball when it was first and goal? It was on the 4 yard line against
yeah. He can
Ohio
jump
State,
there. Yeah,
and you just ran it. And I
yeah,
like Katron Allen, and you ran it up the middle, up the middle, up the middle with lateral motions, which I didn't understand. Take that lineman, put him in front of Tyler Warren, and if you just ram it forward, there's no way you're not going to get 4 yards
yeah,
over 4 plays. That's just too much muscle.
yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah,
I'm with you. Yeah, it's frustrating. Jake, what were your thoughts on the Indiana Michigan game?
Listen, this is that what Michigan is a team that is much more talented than their record this year. Like, so
Yeah,
I'm not exactly surprised by it. I felt Michigan, had they never went away from Davis Warren, this season could have been different. I don't think they're a playoff team or anything. It's not what I'm saying, but I just think
yeah,
that they really stunted their growth by making a few decisions this year. And what we saw, how they played against Indiana, is closer to who I expected them to be this year. On
yeah,
the flip side, it was good and encouraging to see Indiana win a game where they faced adversity, where it wasn't a blowout, where their offense did struggle to move the ball. Listen, a lot of offenses struggle to move the ball against Michigan for the consistency of 4 quarters.
yeah,
But what you saw from them was resolve and an ability to win in other ways. Special teams had to show up. Their
yeah,
defense had to show up. I mean, Rourke throws the interception. Michigan gets the ball inside the 10-yard line, and the defense forces a field goal. Like, these are
yeah,
these are little notches on the belt for Indiana that we hadn't seen all year. So I know some people are saying, "Ooh, now Indiana's exposed." That's not my takeaway. I look at this and say, if we judged Ohio State from when they played Nebraska, we could make the same argument, right? But that was just Ohio State wasn't on that day and they found a way to win. I'm not
yeah.
going to judge Indiana fully by how they played Michigan in a negative way. I'm going to say that's a good team that found a way to win against the Michigan
Yeah.
team that gave them everything they could handle.
In a really weird way, I feel better about Indiana after watching that game than I did before. I mean, Michigan, probably the most talented team they played yet this season.
Oh
Just
yeah.
looking at pure talent on paper, and they found a way to win the game when things didn't always go well. And the Indiana offense was good in the first half. Curtis Rourke threw for almost 200 yards, 2 touchdowns. Second half is where it got really bad. And I've said this before. I really believe that championship teams have to be crash tested at some point.
Yeah.
You have to go through a little bit of adversity. You got to battle through it a little bit, and you need to find different ways to win. Special teams, as you said, Jake, big punt return at the end of that game. They managed the clock well at the end. They closed it out. The defense stepped up huge on that final drive of the game. So if there's one concern for Indiana, it's that they ran the ball for 40 yards in this game, and they're
Yeah.
going to have to run the football better and not put so much pressure on Curtis Rourke late in the game. But I thought Indiana managed the game well, found a way to win, and I left that game and watching it even more encouraged about Indiana having multiple ways to win football games.
That was a physical game. I mean,
Yeah,
my goodness, was that a physical game. And the bye week, the whole season has felt like divine in nature for Indiana. The way the schedule's
yeah,
laid out, like the
I
fact
know.
that they have a bye week ahead of Ohio State is just huge for them.
And,
So
and it's kind of funny how I'm like assuming that Indiana loses that game, and I can see your face. You're like, stop saying that they're going to lose to Ohio State.
yeah, that's the consensus, right? Like and I
Yeah,
get it because that's Ohio State's earned the right to be favored in these games. That's just where that they're a historically great program. But I'm not Indiana in a sense, man. That's a team that is believing in themselves maybe more than anyone in college football. Like
yeah,
Cignetti, there's not a seed of doubt in his
yeah,
mind that his team can win every game. This is what he does. And in each game that they've won, you've seen that belief grow. So I know it's, again, they can use that to their advantage. The fact that the whole world is assuming Ohio State wins that one, you better believe Cignetti is going to find a way to use that to motivate his team. All right, real quick before we get out of here, though, very interesting game in the Big Ten this week. USC, Nebraska, both teams going through some changes. USC deciding to bench Miller Moss, going with their next quarterback. Nebraska making some changes in terms of the offensive play caller. We'll see if Dylan Raiola is healthy enough to play. What are you interested in this matchup? Because this one isn't about, hey, who's going to win the conference title. I think both teams have had a disappointing year this year.
Yeah.
But man, is this a critical matchup and a must win? What are you looking forward to seeing?
Yeah, I mean, exactly that. This is a must win for Matt Rule. It's a must win for Lincoln Riley. In two historic programs that have had down years, that have really been disappointed. Their fan bases are disappointed, but still bright futures for both these programs. I mean, Matt Rule, I think, has still done a nice job building that program the way they've recruited. Lincoln Riley, same thing. I think it takes time. It's hard to join a across the country conference from LA, first time playing in the physical Big Ten. Think about how many games USC was close to winning and how different that season could have turned out for USC. I mean, they beat LSU week 1, then lose a couple tight games, barely lose to Penn State, barely lose a couple other games in the season. So it's a must win for both these coaches, and getting a win in this game will certainly give some much needed confidence and momentum to these programs going into the offseason. I know it's week 12, week 11, whatever it is, but having this at the end of the season kind of, and USC beating a team like Nebraska beating a team like USC, that's kind of a notch in your belt win that will just give some momentum that's really important for these coaches to get right now.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, both it's mirrored in principle in the sense that, hey, you hear about year 2 Matt Rule and they start off 5-1 and then have fallen off a cliff. It's Lincoln Riley. He goes out and gets Danton Lynn. The defense is going to be much improved. You beat LSU, and we're thinking, oh shoot. I thought I was ready to say I told you so about USC. They've fallen off a cliff. So the value of the winner this weekend can't be understated, can't be overstated. And then there is going to be a loser in this game, and the mental battle that the loser has to overcome is going to be very challenging, but obviously very important.
Yeah. What game are you at this weekend?
I'm at Wrigley this weekend. I got Northwestern Ohio State, so
wow.
little interesting one.
That'll be awesome. Wrigley, have you seen the box yet at Wrigley? What's
I haven't. I've heard different things. It's kind of a bit interesting, but all I know is at Wrigley, if you're in the suites, they come around with a dessert truck. So I'm hoping the dessert truck makes its rounds and makes it up to the booth. That's one of the big points I'm curious about. How about you? Who do you got this weekend?
That's all we need. I just called a game last night. We're filming this Wednesday morning. I called the Maction game last night.
Nice.
Yeah, Ball State Buffalo overtime game was a great one. So I am off on Saturday. So I'll be tuning into your game.
Oh man, enjoy it. So. Fun, yeah. Always a pleasure, man. It's great to see you excited. We're in that championship halfway through November. It's championship season, so the drama will only continue to grow. Great to see you guys. Thanks for tuning in to the Breneman and Butt Show. We'll see you next week.